Our story begins in the border territory of the Kingdom of Kazel. This place is suffering from a terrible drought. Their well has dried up and the soil is cracked all over. Because of this, the people living there are afraid and try to leave in search of a better place to live. But the governor of Kazel considers this an act of heresy. He begins sending numerous soldiers to punish those attempting to flee. They start killing everyone indiscriminately. Even children are slaughtered, and the soldiers do it with sadistic smiles on their faces. The leader overseeing this execution is the son of Kazel's ruler. He is a powerful mage, rumored to have the blood of the divine king running through his veins. He is also a sadistic bastard who claims that even wild beasts understand that favors must be repaid. He asks the people if they even understand why they are still alive in the first place, saying that it's all thanks to the blessings of those with royal blood. And yet, they decide to run away just because it hasn't rained for a few days. A woman at his feet begs for forgiveness and pleads with them to at least spare her son's life. But in a blatant abuse of power, one of the soldiers orders her to shut up and impales her with a spear right in front of her child. The commander scolds the soldier for being too impulsive, saying that killing her quickly took all the fun out of it. The soldier then asks what they can do to entertain their leader, and the leader says he has an idea, but judging by his expression, it's nothing good. He then hangs the wounded from trees and forces their family members to hold them up to keep them from dying, all while cruelly saying that a wife should support her husband. One soldier, stepping on a wounded man's head, points out that they need to tie him up differently or he'll bleed to death, and he says this right in front of the man's wife, who refuses to leave his side. She begs them to stop, but the soldier strikes her and forces her to hold her husband just like the others. It's clear that this leader is a complete sadist. He begins humiliating the woman in every possible way as she cries. But then, another commander arrives at the scene. His name is Sir Zebek, and the sadistic leader recognizes him, but shows no respect for his comrade. Even though Zebek is his sword instructor, Zebek asks if he really has to go this far to punish these people, reminding him that someone with noble blood should at least maintain his dignity. But the leader scoffs, saying that his dignity will remain intact as long as no one gossips about what happened here. He continues mocking the dead and asks Zebek what he's going to do about it. Is he really going to spread rumors about what happened in this place? And as a member of the church, would he really dare to spread something that could tarnish the reputation of someone with royal blood? Zebek hesitates and simply states that the truth of what happened here won't remain hidden forever. The leader grows angry, and one of the soldiers asks if they should get rid of Zebek, but the leader refuses and instead asks for a whip. He then begins whipping the same woman from before, both to vent his anger and to further provoke Zebek. But even after all that, the woman still refuses to let go of her husband. Bound by the rules of the church, Zebek is forced to turn a blind eye to everything, while the leader mocks him, saying he needs to enjoy life more. Time passes after this horrific scene. The sun sets and the soldiers leave. The woman, who we now learn is named Safia, continues embracing her husband, who is still alive, and begs her to leave him behind and escape. But she refuses. She holds onto him until she pulls a coin with a strange symbol from her pocket. She uses the coin to draw a triangular symbol on the ground and asks if they will really save them, though it's not yet clear who she's referring to. Before she can do anything else, she faints as night falls. She wakes up in Zebek's arms as he gives her some water. He asks her not to speak and tries to give her some food, but she passes out again. When she wakes up, it's already daylight and Zebek is still sitting beside her. He tells her that he returned without anyone knowing, but he has to leave soon or the young master will punish him. But before leaving, he tells her something about her husband. She won't have to hold on to him anymore because, unfortunately, he has already died. Even so, she runs to his side and continues embracing him. She then looks at Zebek with eyes full of hatred and asks for his name, so she can ask the Herald's clan to spare his life when they arrive. Zebek asks if she's referring to the ones known as the Assassins of Sanctity and calls them soulless heretics. He asks if she truly summoned them, but at the same time, he knows that even if they were real and answered her call, Kazel had dozens of armed soldiers under his command, and Zebek himself was there as well. Not to mention, the young master was a warrior with noble blood. Zebek asks if she understands just how powerful divine blood, also known as the blood of Yaegas, truly is. The woman responds that even if their enemies are mages, the heralds can defeat them, as they themselves are mages as well. And the reason they are called the Assassins of Sanctity is because they earned that title after killing other kings who also had divine blood. The soldier tells her that she must not be thinking straight and that after what she's been through, it's understandable. But he introduces himself as Sir Zebek, making it clear that he's not telling her this so she can have the heralds spare his life. Instead, he says that if they do come, he will fight them with everything he has. Then he leaves, saying he will return during the night. And the woman, barely clinging to consciousness, whispers that there are only 2 days left until they arrive. We then see a flashback of the past of the young woman named Safia. She lived in an isolated countryside house. She is talking with her boyfriend and future husband. He hands her a coin, the same one she later used to create the symbol on the ground. She asks what it is, and her husband asks if she has ever heard of the Herald's clan. Safia says she has, from a story her father used to tell her when she was a child, that they were soulless assassins. Her husband tells her that this coin is called the Emperor's Gold and that it has the power to summon those without souls. And he warns her to be careful because the church's enforcers will execute anyone found in possession of such a coin. He tells her this story to scare her a little, then takes the chance to give her a loving kiss. It's heartbreaking knowing what happens to them in the future. Sophia then asks why he gave her such a dangerous gift. Her husband replies that it is in case something terrible happens to them. If that time ever comes, she must draw a triangle on the ground and place the coin at its center. Then, a herald will come to help her. But he says that he hopes she never has to use that coin in her lifetime. Then, we return to the present, to the tragic fate this couple met. Sophia managed to draw the symbol, but she no longer has the strength to hold on to her husband, and she dies right there beside him. While all of this is happening, Xebeck's soldiers are off bathing and mocking the people they slaughtered. Xebeck is lost in thought, reflecting on everything that has happened and how the day feels much hotter than usual. That's when he is approached by the arrogant leader from before, who tells Xebeck to cheer up and smile more. But Xebeck responds by saying that if they keep killing citizens like this, they won't be able to collect taxes from them. They get into an argument, with Xebeck trying to suggest that the leader evacuate some of these people to the ruler's fertile lands so they can at least contribute to agriculture. But the ruler's son scoffs, saying that agriculture doesn't depend on an individual's skill, it depends on the soil, the climate, the sky, and the light of the king. And isn't that what the church taught them? He is clearly twisting the church's teachings to justify his slaughter and oppression. He goes on, claiming that the reason they are facing this drought now is because the people were not faithful enough to the church of the king. That there were once those who made the land fertile and then others came and sinned, causing the drought to arrive. Therefore, it is their duty to punish the sinners and those who contribute to keeping the land fertile. In other words, the ruler and his army deserve these lands by right. To top it off, he even challenges Xebeck, saying that he is only doing this to maintain order, and if Xebeck wants to go against his orders and try to save the sinners, then he is free to try. Xebeck remains silent, trying to process the absurdity of what he just heard, but he also finds himself unable to do anything about it. Even so, he decides to return to the tree where Sophia was. When he arrives, he finds her already dead on the ground, and at that moment, he realizes that it's over. Even if the heralds come, it would all be pointless. But then, he senses a presence appearing behind him. As he tries to turn around, a masked man suddenly appears and places a sword against his neck. The masked man warns that if Xebeck turns around, he will cut his throat. Xebeck is stunned by the stranger's level of technique and asks if he is a herald. The man replies that he is and asks if Xebeck is a knight or if he came to retrieve the bodies. Xebeck introduces himself and states that he serves the church of the king. The masked man, just to be sure, asks if Xebeck is the one who made the contract to summon him here, saying that it would be ironic if a holy knight of the church had invoked him. Xebeck asks if he's joking, apparently offended by the comment. The masked man then notices the triangle on the ground and realizes that Sophia was the one who made the contract and summoned him, but since she is already dead, he just got himself a free coin. He asks Xebeck what is going on here, and the knight responds that if he puts away his sword and keeps a reasonable distance, then he will set aside his honor and explain everything to the herald. The masked man agrees and steps far away from the soldier, who now wonders whether this man is truly a ghost or not. The herald then asks if Xebeck thinks he would have had the upper hand if he hadn't been caught off guard earlier. But he also acknowledges that if Xebeck is a knight of the church, then at the very least, he must have some courage. Xebeck asks if he is a mage, and the masked man replies that while all the other heralds are mages, he is not. However, distinguishing superhuman physical power from magic is difficult. Even Xebeck himself is surprised to hear that the man isn't a mage. He finally asks the masked stranger's name, and he introduces himself as the herald of the emperor, Azadin of the 108 spirits. He took his time showing up, but from now on, he will be the protagonist of this story. Xebeck thinks about how the 108 spirits are the lowest rank among the heralds, but even so, the speed Azadin just displayed was far beyond ordinary. Azadin then asks him to explain everything that has happened so far. Xebeck tells him everything, and Azadin seems deep in thought. But before they can continue, they are interrupted by a talking owl, which lands on Azadin's shoulder. The owl tells Azadin that he responded to the request, even though the one who made it is already dead, meaning he just got himself a free gold coin. But now that he's done, he needs to refocus on his other mission, though the owl doesn't specify what that mission is, only that he doesn't have time to waste. Azadin gets irritated but decides to leave. However, before he can, Xebeck stops him. The soldier asks if he's really just going to take the reward and leave like it was nothing. Azadin is surprised and asks why a knight would care so much about completing this task, especially since it would mean trouble for his master. Xebeck says that won't happen because he will take Azadin down right here. The herald smirks, saying he's surprised that Xebeck is finally drawing his sword, but only now when it's to spill his blood. That same sword remained sheathed while innocent people suffered unjustly. Even for someone like him, Azadin says that's a tragedy. And then, he asks Xebeck, who are you really angry at? Is it Azadin? Or is it himself for standing by and doing nothing while people cried out for help? The soldier gets even angrier and snaps, what the hell do you think you know about me? Azadin doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he asks another question. Do you know the constellations in the sky? Do you know the names and myths people have associated with them? He explains that two people can look at the same thing, but what they feel will always be different. He uses the constellations as an example. Some people might look at Sagittarius and see the protagonist of a fantasy story. Others might see nothing more than a few flickering lights in the sky. And the same applies to the people who were slaughtered by the soldiers. Xebec saw them one way, but the soldiers saw them completely differently. Xebec mutters that, in the end, it didn't matter, because he couldn't do anything to save them. He remembers that, as a knight of the church, it was his duty to revere those of royal blood. Even so, Azadin tells him that he has no intention of fighting him, and since he sympathized with the girl who died, his sword is not Xebec's enemy. Azadin then cuts the rope that was keeping Safia's husband tied and gently lays his body on the ground. Then, he asks Xebec if he has a shovel, saying that he's going to give them a proper burial. Xebec is shocked. The ruler, Cazel, had planned to leave the dead hanging from trees so they could be resurrected as undead, only for him to later show off his power by eliminating them again. The mere act of giving these people a burial was an act of defiance against the ruler. Azadin says that if Xebec doesn't have a shovel, it's fine, and he starts digging the ground with his bare hands. Moved by the herald's determination, and as a sign of respect for the dead, Xebec puts down his sword and starts digging with his hands as well. Together, they finish building the graves and say a prayer for the dead to rest in peace. Xebec finds it curious that a herald is reciting a prayer from the Order of the Saviors, but Azadin says he likes their ideology. The knight thinks about how reckless Azadin is, having abandoned the fate of his own birth clan to follow a path of heresy. But Azadin simply states that if he didn't follow what he believed was right, then his birth would have no meaning at all. Xebec is about to ask what he thinks of the Order of the Saviors, but suddenly Azadin starts unbuckling his belt. For a moment, the knight is completely confused, but then Azadin pulls out a bow and aims in a direction. He warns that Xebec's leader is approaching. When they look, Cazel's men appear and surround the two of them. The leader taunts Xebec, sneering that if he liked that little farmer girl so much, he should have just said so. Xebec realizes that the leader already knows what he did, and he braces himself for the worst. They are outnumbered, and even he wouldn't be able to defeat all of them alone. The leader then demands to know who the masked man next to Xebec is, and Azadin instantly draws his bow and aims at them. And then, he fires an arrow at an insane speed. The arrow cuts through the entire army and pierces straight through the left eye of a soldier, the one standing at the very back of the formation. He just demonstrated that he can hit anyone he wants with ease. Everyone panics, and Xebec is stunned by the herald's accuracy. Azadin is already loading more arrows, preparing to fire again. Some soldiers raise their shields, trying to block the shot, but the arrow curves through the air, and instead of stopping, it breaks the shield and hits the soldier in a rather unfortunate place. Xebec still can't believe what he's witnessing and just stands there watching. Then Azadin speaks. He says that he heard Xebec's question, the one about what he thinks of the Order of the Saviors, and he finally gives his answer. He says that he agrees with the belief that a person's worth is not determined by their birth but by their beliefs and actions, and because of that, to him, those born with royal blood who choose to abuse their power and massacre others cannot be considered nobles. He then raises another arrow, and this time, he points it directly at the leader of Cazel. The man is foaming with rage at the protagonist standing before him. Cazel orders Xebec to attack the protagonist, but before he can even finish speaking, Azadin leaps into the air. He hovers above the soldiers, with only the moon behind him. As they stare, unsure of what to do, the protagonist rains down a flurry of arrows on them. Some try to resist, attacking him in every way possible, but Azadin is too fast. His shots land directly in their eyes. In the chaos, one of the arrows grazes Cazel's ear and hits another soldier nearby. That's when Cazel realizes the protagonist isn't trying to kill them. Instead, he is permanently disabling them, targeting their eyes and certain other areas. Azadin finally introduces himself as a herald, which only makes the soldiers even more terrified. The protagonist runs out of arrows, and Cazel sees an opportunity to attack, but he barely gets the chance before Azadin punches him straight in the eye. The army leader collapses to the ground, screaming in agony. It looks like he just lost that eye for good. Meanwhile, Azadin keeps cutting down more soldiers. Then, the protagonist turns to the remaining men and casually remarks that he's already thinned their numbers quite a bit with just his bow, but if they still want to fight, he'll take care of the rest with his sword. And to really scare them, he stabs one of the fallen soldiers right in the malachite. At this point, everyone is wondering why Azadin is so obsessed with castrating them, but he doesn't stop. Azadin proceeds to incapacitate every last soldier, castrating them one by one, but without killing a single person. Finally, he finds Cazel crawling away, desperately trying to escape. Azadin steps in front of him and declares that it's his turn now. Panicked, Cazel tries to cast a blinding spell to blind the protagonist, but he completely misses, hitting one of his own allies instead, who instantly loses his vision. Meanwhile, Azadin doesn't even seem affected by it. Cazel, still desperate, starts bragging about his royal blood, but Azadin cuts that nonsense short and cuts off something else, too. With a single slash of his sword, Cazel is castrated. Now on the ground, missing Trusting in Ai and his manhood, Kozel begs for his life, offering Azadin money, women, anything he wants. He reminds him that he is a member of the sacred Yaega's family. Azadin simply sighs, mocking his misfortune, and replies, "Tough luck, buddy. I'm an assassin of sanctity, and that means I have to finish the job." Kozel, seeing no way out, pleads for Zebek's help, but the knight finally stands up to his master. Zebek pretends that he can't see anything, because of the very same blindness spell that Kozel himself cast earlier. Realizing there's no escape, Kozel clings to his noble status one last time. "You can't do this. I am a noble." Azadin tilts his head as if considering. Then he says, "Maybe I should let you live, but if you're going to stay alive, you'd better learn to be a better person. A little more optimistic, you know." And then, with one final stroke, he stabs Kozel's remaining eye. Now, blind, castrated, and without an army, Kozel has been reduced to nothing, a fate far more fitting than a quick death. With that, Azadin has fulfilled his contract. He is free to continue his journey. And with a smirk, he declares, "The Emperor's law has been carried out." After the battle, Zebek points his sword at Azadin and declares that, as a knight of the church, he cannot let him leave without a fight, even if the herald has done good deeds. Azadin chuckles and says that Zebek isn't like the other knights of the church. This offends Zebek, but Azadin clarifies that it was meant as a compliment. He explains that most of the church's knights are just scoundrels who were exiled from their homes due to inheritance disputes. The protagonist then asks if Zebek has what it takes to walk the same path as him. Before the knight can respond, Azadin vanishes into a cloud of darkness, leaving only a parting remark, "One day we'll meet again." Zebek is left standing alone, surrounded by fallen soldiers. No one had been able to defeat Azadin, and every single one of them had suffered irreparable wounds. As he reflects on Azadin's words, he realizes how much they applied to him as a soldier as well. But at the very least, he now feels like a huge weight has been lifted off his shoulders. The scene cuts to a grand church. A man sits on a throne, surrounded by a group of people kneeling before him. They beg him to remove this year's taxes. They explain that everyone is starving, many have fled to become nomads, and those who die of hunger rise as the undead, wandering the streets. They are overwhelmed by thieves and monsters, and can no longer afford to pay taxes. This irritates the man on the throne, who is revealed to be the ruler himself, Governor Kozel. He scoffs, calling them shameless, and declares that, in the end, nothing will ever change the filthy blood running through their veins. However, he offers them a way out, saying that he can end their suffering and bring them comfort if that is what they desire. They feel a brief sense of relief, but then Kozel adds a condition: if they fail to meet his expectations, he will send them all to the gallows. The group panics, but Kozel tells them to calm down. Then, in his right hand, he conjures a small flame, and from it emerges a tiny red book. He tells them that their task will be worth at least one page of this book. The men look at each other in confusion. They are ignorant about magic and ask him to explain what he means. Kozel smirks, saying that even simpletons like them can find what he seeks. They only need to wish for it, and it will respond to their call. Finally, he reveals what they must find, a grimoire similar to the one he is holding. If they manage to bring him such a book, he will exempt their village from taxes for 3 years and provide them with tons of wheat, barley, and oats. One of the men gathers his courage and asks Kozel to at least tell them the name of the book they're looking for. With an unsettling grin, Kozel reveals that they must find a copy of the Divine King's book. The mere mention of its name fills them with dread. It is clearly not an easy book to find. In the shadows behind the king, a snake with golden eyes slithers into the room. Kozel remains unfazed, even as the snake transforms into a stunning woman. She tells him that mentioning the book's name to them might have been a reckless decision. Kozel, however, dismisses her concern, stating that her people have already been searching for the grimoire everywhere, so rumors of the hunt will spread across the continent anyway. That's why it's better to send as many people as possible to gather the book's pages before anyone else does. Then he asks why she came. She explains that his son has failed his mission. Kozel laughs in disbelief. That makes no sense. Kozel's army never fails. They have Zebek with them? It's ironic how even his own father had more faith in Zebek than in him. The woman confirms that this time, it was true, because the one who opposed him was a member of the Herald's clan. She adds that the Heralds must also be after the Divine King's book, since that's the only way they can break their curse. Kozel narrows his eyes. Did Kozel die? She shakes her head. No, but he lost the vision in both eyes, and he no longer has his reproductive organ. Kozel falls silent for a moment. Then, he orders soldiers to be sent to kill the Herald. The woman bows slightly, saying she will inform the soldiers immediately, but Kozel stops her. Instead, he tells her to send someone else to handle it, then pulls her onto his lap. If one of my sons has been castrated, I'll just have to make another one. From the look on her face, it's clear what happens next. The scene cuts to Azadin in the desert. He is out of water and dying of thirst. Irritated, he glares at the owl spirit perched on his shoulder, snapping, "You just had to be dramatic and say they'd arrive in 2 days. If not for that, we could have had more time to prepare." The owl puffs up indignantly, demanding, "How dare you speak that way to the voice of the emperor?" But Azadin just scoffs. "This is all your fault. You went and died with no plan whatsoever, and now people look down on the heralds. They call us soulless wretches." He keeps grumbling about how unprepared they were for this journey. But then, suddenly, he senses something strange. A mysterious aura fills the air. When Azadin looks up, he sees sees the ghosts of all the people who died at the tree. They bow to him in gratitude. Azadin watches them silently for a moment before saying, "These lands have neither the light of the king nor the blessing of the archangels. It's not safe for you to linger here. Your regrets have been erased. You can rest in peace now." But instead of fading away, the ghosts point towards something in the distance. Azadin follows their gesture and sees a well. He sighs in relief. "Oh, so you were just trying to show me where the water is? Thanks." He walks toward it and lowers the bucket. Expecting to find water, he pulls it back up. But instead of water, inside the bucket is a torn page of the Divine King's book. We then see a flashback about the Herald's clan. Originally, they were a race called the Aragasa. They came from a distant continent, crossing through a massive typhoon, and eventually landed on the continent of Wybris. At that time, the 8 divine kings of the Yaegas family ruled over the continent, each holding one of the 8 thrones. However, one of these 8 kings eventually seized all the thrones for himself, subjugating his own brothers, who had once been kings alongside him. This new emperor, belonging to the Yaeslat family, decided to eliminate everything that remained of the old 8 kings. By chance, the Aragasa had just arrived, and they needed land to settle on. In exchange for their loyalty, the emperor gave them a grimoire known as the Song of the Yellow Bird and a spirit called the Voice of the Emperor. In return, the foreigners signed a contract with the emperor and became his heralds. From that moment on, the hands of the Aragasa were stained with the blood of the gods. They became both the emperor's sword and his executioners, hunting down and killing nobles who opposed the emperor's laws and thrived at his expense. This was considered the greatest sin one could commit in this land, as its people believed in an afterlife and eternal life. Because of these crimes, the emperor was eventually killed, and the continent was once again divided into 8 kingdoms. The Aragasa, once the emperor's heralds, were now despised by the people. The heralds fell from grace, and the world began to call them the Soulless. To make things even worse, they faced an unexpected problem. Even after the emperor's death, they remained bound by the contract they had made with him. Now, they were forced to serve the emperor as his heralds for all eternity. Azadin examines the page he found. He confirms that yes, this is indeed a page from the divine book. He wonders if this book was the source of the emperor's power, while the spirits bid him farewell, thanking him for his help. Azadin wonders if collecting all the pages will allow him to break the herald's curse. The owl's spirit scoffs, saying it's rude to call such an honorable duty a curse. Azadin doesn't seem particularly thrilled about this task. The owl insists that he should be, because this is the ultimate goal of all heralds. We then see what missions the heralds must fulfill to break their curse. They must amass a total of 100,000 gold coins. They must find the Divine King's book. If they accomplish both conditions, they will be freed from their duty to the emperor. This is the burden of all heralds, but Azadin fears that this quest will spread across the world. And then he reveals the truth. The reason the Divine King's book was torn apart and scattered across the world was because of his father. Azadin continues walking through the desert, still desperate for water. But then, we see that someone is watching him from behind a rock. The observers turn out to be a blonde girl and her companion. She recognizes the protagonist and sneers, calling him the traitor's son. She also insults him, mocking him for not being able to use magic and being cursed. She then starts listing off a bunch of rumors about Azadin, including how he wet the bed until he was 8 and how he can't even untie a knot properly. Finally, she laughs and doubts that he is even worthy of carrying the herald's duty. Her name is Midiam, and her companion cautiously suggests they should leave. He doesn't see any reason to work with a low-ranked herald like Azadin, but Midiam refuses, saying that she wants to test his skills. The companion warns her that a servant cannot attack a herald, but Midiam doesn't care. If she defeats him, she will take his position as herald. The boy reminds her that even if he's weak, Azadin was trained by Master Kazas. That means there's a chance he's stronger than she thinks, but Midiam doesn't buy it. An idiot will always be an idiot, no matter who trained him. She still can't understand how the son of a traitor, who can't even use magic, became a herald instead of her. She claims that he's just taking up space, preventing truly competent people like her from becoming heralds. And with that, she fires an arrow at him, but Azadin effortlessly dodges and throws a rock right between her eyes. He calmly walks over and asks if she was the one who shot that arrow. And then, we see that he simply caught the arrow and stored it in his quiver, like it was nothing. Midiam, flustered, lies and says it was just a greeting. But deep down, she is shocked by his reflexes. Azadin asks who they are, and they finally introduce themselves. She is Midiam of Ether, and her companion is Ishmael. They claim to be assistants sent to help him. Midiam, still flustered, tries to play it off. I saw your quiver was empty, so I just wanted to give you another arrow. That's all. Azadin smirks. You two must have been really bored in the sacred lands if you came all the way here to assist me. Then, without a second thought, he tells them to go home and even calls them children. Midiam gets furious and asks if he even heard that she is from the Ether bloodline. But Azadin just shrugs. Bloodlines mean nothing to the heralds. If you're here to assist me, then you're my subordinates. Besides, you shot an arrow at me. Then, he asks if they want him to show them what happens when someone attacks a herald outside of the sacred lands. That's enough to make them realize that maybe those rumors about him being weak weren't so accurate after all. Azadin then orders Midiam to apologize. Do it as an Aragasa or as an enemy. Which will it be? Midiam grits her teeth but eventually apologizes, confess, admitting that she is an Aragasa just like him. Azadin accepts her apology and scolds her. Don't go shooting arrows at strangers, and don't play with weapons outside the sacred lands. Finally, he tells them that he won't report what happened, and since he doesn't need assistance, they can go back home. But just as he's about to ask them for water, Mid-I-Am suddenly challenges him to a duel. Ishmael tries to warn her that Azadin is dangerous, but Mid-I-Am is already too determined. She now sees that he is much stronger than the rumors suggested, but that's exactly why she can't back down. And so she declares, this duel will be for the position of herald. The protagonist is surprised by Mid-I-Am's request and mutters that someone named Arail has been a really bad influence on these kids. Then, he asks if she understands what will happen if she loses. Mid-I-Am confidently responds that she knows everything she owns, including her life, will belong to him if she loses. But she's prepared for that. Azadin thinks about how Arail might be a problem, but the bigger issue is that this girl is underestimating him way too much. He tells her to reconsider, explaining that Arail is the only one capable of defeating a herald. And no matter what kind of reputation Azadin has, he didn't receive the title of herald for nothing. But Mid-I-Am steps back and once again challenges him to a duel. This time, the owl spirit hears her challenge and officially accepts it on Azadin's behalf. Mid-I-Am immediately recognizes the voice of the Emperor and Ishmael starts to panic. The voice of the Emperor is a spirit directly tied to the hero, and now that it has witnessed the challenge, backing out of this duel is no longer an option. But Mid-I-Am remains unfazed. It doesn't matter. I just have to win. Mid-I-Am has already lost. Azadin is now drinking their water, quenching his thirst. Ishmael is still in shock, unable to process what just happened. Then, the scene rewinds slightly, taking us back to the duel. Azadin used an ancient Aragasa technique, but instead of shooting arrows, he threw small stones at Mid-I-Am. She tried to dodge and even created barriers to defend herself, but nothing worked against his raw strength. For a moment, she even mistook his attacks for magic. She launched a barrage of attacks, trying everything she could, but just when she thought she had finally hit him, she realized that she had only struck a mirage. In the end, Azadin completely caught her off guard. Even as she desperately tried to defend herself with magic, he grabbed her arm and landed a devastating punch. It's over. The punch was so powerful that Mid-I-Am was sent flying, crashing straight into a rock. Watching this, Ishmael is furious. He shouts that someone with the blood of a traitor should never lay hands on a noble lineage. But before he can act, the owl spirit intervenes. It declares that the duel is over and that Azadin is the winner. Then, it delivers another harsh reality check. Since Ishmael tried to interfere, he now belongs to Azadin, just like Mid-I-Am. Realizing that she has truly lost, Mid-I-Am reaches for a blade, intending to take her own life. But Azadin stops her instantly, kicking the knife away before she can act. He calmly states that he knew she'd try something like that. Then, he delivers a brutal truth. But since you lost the duel, you don't even have the right to die. You can only do that when I die, or when I allow you to. Then, he glares at her. Did you really challenge me without even knowing this? Mid-I-Am grits her teeth in silence, but Azadin has no intention of keeping them as slaves. After finishing his drink, he tells them, that should be enough of a lesson for you too. I'll release you now. Mid-I-Am and Ishmael are stunned. Azadin simply shrugs it off, telling them to forget this ever happened. That'd be better for your records. They still don't understand, but the scene cuts to a short time later. Azadin is still walking through the desert, but Mid-I-Am and Ishmael are still following him. Annoyed, he tells them once again to go back to the sanctuary. But Mid-I-Am, completely oblivious to danger, grins. You just got yourself a beautiful and talented girl as a slave, and you're really gonna let her go? Just like that? Ishmael nearly dies of embarrassment upon hearing this. Azadin, on the other hand, is unfazed. I'm not sure about the beautiful part. And if you were actually talented, you wouldn't have lost to me? Mid-I-Am scowls. Then, Azadin casually adds, there are plenty of men in this world who like younger girls. Some even force them into arranged marriages. You should think twice before challenging someone to a duel. Or better yet, just never challenge anyone again. Then, he smirks. If there's someone you need to kill, just assassinate them directly. Ishmael squints at Azadin. He realizes something. Azadin isn't saying this out of concern for Mid-I-Am. It's more like he's mocking her. But Mid-I-Am reacts in a way no one expects. She lights up, eyes sparkling. She loves it. This is new. The scene cuts to another flashback, this time about how a servitude contract works. Basically, the Emperor of Aragasa offered everyone what they needed, but any traitor would die in a horrible way. In the beginning, this contract was merely a symbol of honor, but after the Emperor's death, it became a frightening curse. Even after the Emperor's demise, the effects of the contract remained the same, forcing the Aragasa clan to remain loyal to him to this day. This cycle of servitude seemed endless, until one day there was a sign that they might be able to break it completely. That was when the Herald's clan interfered in the succession war of the Kingdom of Terrasar. The Aragasa managed to secure victory and obtained a copy of the Divine King's book. But then a traitor stole the book and fled with it. That traitor's name was Acker. He was eventually captured by the clan, and they began interrogating him to return the book. But he never said a word. Even with the clan using every method they had to make him talk, their hopes were dashed. The traitor had divided the book into several parts and thrown them into the heart of the mountain, and because of that, Acker became the first person to die from the curse. And it wasn't a pleasant death at all, because he died after giving birth to two twin babies eyes and with a masculine body. Those two brothers born of him were named Azadin and Arail. Of the two, Arail became the strongest herald in all of history, while Azadin became known as a useless fool. Back in the present, Ishmael wonders who spread that absurd lie about him. Once again, the protagonist tries to send them away because he doesn't need any assistance, but Mid-I-Am says they came to deliver a letter to him. They explain that it's from the leader of the Salasma region, and the protagonist already remembers that he's never been particularly fond of that guy. The letter basically informed him about the copies of the Divine King's book that had been scattered around, and that it was the protagonist's mission to recover them all. Judging by what's written in the letter, other heralds must already be aware of this mission too. Azadin then asks the two if they are already aware of the copies of the book, and they say yes, which makes the protagonist worried, if even they know about it. He then says he's going to head to Salasma to speak with the leader in person and thanks them for delivering the letter. Mid-I-Am says that since they're all heading the same way, why doesn't he come along with them? She can even provide more information about what's happening in their clan. The protagonist replies that since he doesn't own that road, they can join him if they want. The girl beams happily, and they set off on their journey. After walking for a while, they stop briefly to rest, but it's a short rest because the protagonist immediately orders everyone to get up. They arrive at a small spring and stop to drink some water. But as they do so, some bandits appear, and we see that they are the same ones who were speaking with Governor Cazel in the throne room earlier. They ask who allowed them to drink from that spring anyway. The protagonist says he isn't in the least interested in getting into trouble with them and asks what they want in exchange for the water. The malicious guy replies that he wants all of them in exchange, and Azadin asks if there really isn't any discussion possible with them. But the bandits only choose to mock the protagonist's mask instead of talking, and their leader then orders that they capture the girl and kill the other two. However, since the protagonist isn't very bright, the scene quickly cuts to show them already on the ground after receiving a beating from him. They beg the protagonist to spare their lives and explain that they are only doing this because Governor Cazel ordered everyone out there to search for the Divine King's book. They ask how they were supposed to find something they'd never even seen before, and Mid-I-Am says that they must be nothing more than thieves making up excuses just to stay alive. But the protagonist says he doubts that is the case, since this isn't an area where travelers usually pass through, so it wouldn't be very profitable for thieves to linger around. Mid-I-Am says that, anyway, they need to kill the guys to silence them, but the protagonist asks her to wait. He says he never kills anyone without reason, and Ishmael agrees that it's fine, but even if they are good people, there's a chance they might reveal their location to others if allowed to live. Still, the protagonist says that isn't enough reason to kill them just so everyone feels more comfortable, and that everyone deserves at least a second chance. The bandits are very happy to hear this and start flattering the protagonist, but he orders them to shut up. Ishmael is astonished and says he would have never expected someone from the Herald's clan to refuse to kill. But then the protagonist lands a punch on one of the bandits, and we see that while he may not have killed them, as a lesson for trying to steal, he's going to destroy one eye of each of them right there. He also warns them not to move too much or they might die from the blow. The protagonist says he did say he'd spare them, but not before inflicting permanent damage on them, so they'd remember never to harm anyone again, and even if they did, it would be much harder for them with one eye. Mid-I-Am and Ishmael are at a loss for words after that. The scene cuts and we see the bandits completely screwed, each having lost one eye because of the protagonist, but in the end, they don't seem to have changed much, because one of them says that if he ever encounters the protagonist again, he'll see. At that very moment, a giant hand appears behind them and seizes one of the bandits, tearing his head off. Then we see a giant monster behind them. It starts grabbing the bandits by the feet and throwing them into its sack, saying that they are now its portable food. It says its name is Goldu, and after handing over a few bandits for its minions to eat, it spots a village and gets excited because now it's going to have all the food at once. Returning to the protagonist, they are traveling, and Mid-I-Am comments that she was surprised he was so soft on the bandits. Still, it turned out well because they managed to take the bandits' weapons and supplies. Azadin says it's hard for people to understand one another unless they're in the same position, and losing an eye has far more consequences than one might imagine. Now, the bandits will be more afraid of the people they used to rob, which should make them think twice before attacking anyone. Mid-I-Am points out that not only did the protagonist spare their lives, but he also gave them another chance. The protagonist says he's tired of that conversation and changes the subject, adding that he finds it strange that Cazel is after the books now. Ishmael comments that, actually, it makes sense for Cazel to want the books. Since he lost the succession war, he might be trying to use the book's power to climb his way back up the rankings. Azadin says that a figure like that searching for such power is extremely dangerous, and he decides to remove his mask, since it clearly shows he's a herald. Now they need to be more cautious until they manage to leave Cazel's territory. When he finally takes off the mask, we see that the protagonist actually has no eyes, just a huge scar where they should be. Mid-I-Am is startled because, despite having no eyes, he didn't seem to have any trouble fighting or doing other tasks. The protagonist explains that he doesn't know why, but ever since he was little, he's always been able to see, even without eyes. face. So no, he didn't lose them, he never had them in the first place. Mid-Im says she'd rather imagine that he lost them in battle than believe he was born without them. Ishmael says she's being quite rude. Azadin remarks that she said the exact same thing as the person who gave him that scar on his face. When Mid-Im asks who that was, he says it was his sister Arail. We then see a flashback of the protagonist as a child. His sister has just cut across his face. She said it was weird that he didn't have what was supposed to be in the middle of his face, eyes, and that, at least with that scar, she could pretend his eyes had once been there. That's why she cut his face, insisting it would be better for him this way. Returning to the present, he says that in spite of everything, the scar did let him pretend he was blind throughout his life, and he never had any issues while he was alone. But now Mid-Im and Ishmael will also have to act like he's blind in front of everyone. He then takes out a cane, and they head off toward the nearest village. When they arrive, the sun is nearly setting and there's a long line to get into the city. Ishmael says it's been a while since he's come this way, and Mid-Im points out that this is the city where the Imperial Road begins, an excellent place for them to start their journey. He ignores her comment and declares that from now on, he's just a solitary pilgrim on the road, and they're just a couple of orphans traveling with him. But they quickly notice something off about this city. The soldiers are searching everyone who enters, thoroughly and brazenly stealing people's belongings. Ishmael says it wasn't like this last time he was here, and the protagonist realizes they must be desperately looking for something, likely the Divine King's book. A local approaches the protagonist and asks if he can see. He replies that he cannot and introduces Mid-Im and Ishmael as two orphans traveling with him. The old man then explains that Governor Cazel has ordered everyone to search for the Divine King's book, basically confirming the protagonist's suspicions and proving that's exactly what Cazel had been doing in that earlier village. The protagonist realizes how irritating this is going to be to deal with, but he's interrupted when one of the citizens being searched complains that a soldier stole his money. The soldiers beat the man and use the excuse that a grimoire can take any form, even money, so they have to confiscate his cash for further investigation, promising to return it later. A young girl tries to help him, but they threaten her in the same way, so her father steps in and ends up getting beaten in her place. Ishmael asks if they should fight the soldiers now, but Azadin tells him to wait. At that moment, a soldier whispers something to the guard, and they all gather their belongings and dash away. Nobody understands what's going on, but the protagonist says he has excellent hearing and heard them mention that an ogre is headed for the city. They then realize that not only did the soldiers run off, but they also abandoned their people outside and locked the gates. Everyone is furious, but the scene suddenly shifts to a soldier's camp. Here we meet Tarkiev, another of Cazel's illegitimate sons, just as rotten as his brother. He asks if they made sure to lock the gates. They confirm they did, and the noble says that, since they didn't find any copies of the Divine Book, they can leave. One of the soldiers staying in the city asks what they should do, but Tarkiev says they received training for this. The soldier protests it was just a day of training, far from enough, but Tarkiev doesn't care. He's leaving everything in that soldier's hands. If he wants to let the townsfolk in, that's up to him. Tarkiev is out of there. The soldier is annoyed with such a cowardly leader, but he doesn't have time to dwell on it because the ground starts shaking, meaning the ogre is drawing near. Everyone panics, fearing they'll be devoured once the monster arrives. It doesn't take long for the ogre army to attack, setting the forest ablaze and striking everything in their path. The protagonist's group sees the threat heading their way and prepares for battle. They then separate from the group they were with, and one of the women there gives them a lantern so they can find their way. The soldiers warn everyone that the other knights have abandoned them, so now they'll have to defend themselves if they want to survive. Everyone starts working together to help however they can in the fight against the ogres. The protagonist decides to split off from Ishmael and Mid-Im and teleports through the shadows the way he always does. By the castle gate, the ogre army gets ready to attack while the humans fortify their defenses. That's when the leader of the ogres, named Goldu, introduces himself. He brags about how he thinks he's smart for saving food for later, showing off the backpack he's carrying, which holds the bodies of those bandits. He then threatens to charge, and the soldiers, realizing he's the ogre leader, immediately draw their bows and loose a volley of arrows in his direction. We see a small, masked ogre, who appears to be the strategist, giving orders for Goldu to move toward the gate. All the ogres charge alongside him and the battle begins. One ogre picks up a gigantic rock and hurls it at the gate, while the humans push back with all their might to prevent it from breaking. They keep shooting arrows and doing everything they can to stop the ogre's advance, all the while worrying about whether their families have managed to escape. But in the midst of this chaos, the masked ogre senses something strange. His staff starts to glow, and that's when he realizes that a copy of the Divine King's book is indeed somewhere nearby. Apparently, he was looking for it as well. Just then, the protagonist comes soaring down from above, delivering a massive kick right to the center of the masked ogre's face. Azadin effortlessly dodges the enemy's attacks and even saves two soldiers from a giant rock hurled by the orcs. He says he's going to help them and introduces himself as a herald. Before giving more explanations, he leaps into the midst of the monsters and starts taking them all out with his arrows, sticking to his usual tactic of shooting them right in the eye. The ogre leader flies into a rage rage and rushes at him, but the protagonist manages to climb onto the monster's head, controlling his movements so he stomps about, crushing several smaller ogres in the process. During the fight, he notices that one of the bandits he spared is still alive, but more importantly, he needs to figure out what that masked ogre is planning. The ogre then begins to transform into a monstrous creature, proclaiming that he will become the terrifying King of Fangs, and that he needs the Divine King's book, which is somewhere nearby, to achieve his goal. That creature attacks the protagonist with everything it has, but it doesn't seem to know how to distinguish friend from foe. When one of its attacks goes astray and hits Goldu, it begins devouring him on the spot. Even though the ogre is extremely strong, he still can't break free and dies right there. After that brutal scene, it looks straight at the protagonist, and he recognizes it as Godkin Kurt, the Fang King. That ogre then emerges from the middle of that tooth-filled monstrosity and fires a beam of light at Azadin's heart. He tries to threaten the soldiers into handing over the book, saying that if they do, he'll kill them painlessly. But he's interrupted by one of Azadin's attacks. This only makes the monster angrier, but all the protagonist can think about is the light that shot toward his chest. It seemed like it was actually going for the page of the sacred book he was carrying. He can't understand why these creatures would be looking for copies of the book, but he doesn't have much time to think about it because the monster keeps coming at him relentlessly. The fight continues for a while, until the protagonist gradually starts slicing away the monster's fangs, enraging it even more, especially when the protagonist comments that its fangs are too big for its body, and that fangs with hollow roots are always weak, and that the monster is nothing more than a worthless creature made from the remains of the Fang King. The protagonist's sword begins to corrode from the acid the creature gives off, so he starts dodging the attacks, wondering if it's really worth fighting when there's no gold coin reward in it for him. That's when the soldiers begin firing arrows at the creature. Some are hesitant to help a heretical herald, but they realize the church's soldiers abandoned them, so there's nobody left to punish them for helping a heretic now. With that in mind, they decide to fight and assist in taking down the monster, at least for now. The protagonist is pleased, but says it would have been better if they had just handed him the arrows instead of firing them themselves, so the protagonist decides it's time to get serious. He grabs one of the monster's fangs and hurls it at him. At this point, the monster can't possibly get any angrier than it already is, but the protagonist provokes it even more, asking why it's so enraged at him for merely returning its own fangs. The monster keeps insisting it will become the Fang King, and the protagonist continues throwing more and more fangs at it. He says that, unfortunately for the monster, he's the assassin of sanctity, and then he hurls the final fang straight at the masked ogre, finishing it off once and for all. After this grueling battle, the soldiers point their arrows at the protagonist. They demand to know what he's planning and why he defeated those monsters. They go on to accuse him of being the one who brought the monsters here in the first place, and all of it could only have been the fault of a pagan like him. Now in the crosshairs of the very townspeople he just saved, can Azadin prove his innocence? Will he manage to finally recover the pages of the Divine King's book and earn his freedom from being the Emperor's herald? Find out in the next video.